There have been instances where farmers have stopped treating livestock and have gone fully organic but are still not seeing dung beetles. And the reason is it can take a long time for dung beetles to come back because years of historical treatment can affect dung beetles, and it's hard for them to just come back once you stop treating your livestock. So what they can do to speed things up is where my project on rearing dung beetles come in. But first, I would probably recommend understanding what species you already have. And I know that's easier said than done.
Hello, and welcome to ATTRA's Voices from the Field. I'm Nina Prater, and today I'm here with Sneha Haridas, a fourth-year PhD candidate and graduate research assistant at West Virginia University. And we're going to be talking about her research on dung beetles. As many know, dung beetles are important for nutrient cycling, improving soil, pasture, and livestock health, but in some places, their populations have declined. Sneha has been researching ways to help livestock producers in West Virginia figure out how to increase the numbers and diversity of dung beetles on their farms, including looking at the best ways to make a dung beetle nursery. Welcome to Voices from the Field, Sneha. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you, Nina, and NCAT and ATTRA for having me on board.
In your project, you described dung beetles as non-charismatic, but ecologically significant. And I think we can all guess what makes them less charismatic than, say, monarch butterflies. But can you describe why dung beetles are so ecologically significant?
Yeah, for sure. I actually love the title you created, Dung Beetles as your next livestock species. Not only can dung beetles keep your actual livestock and your pasture, soil, and environment happy and healthy, but they could also now bring an additional source of income for producers. And after years of working with them, I can assure that these beetles are friendly and very valuable pets. So they're ecologically very significant because they provide numerous ecosystem services for free. If we talk about the pasture ecosystem in particular, a single cow can produce on an average 60 to 150 pounds of manure a day. And we know that this can add up when you have livestock and you want them to roam around your pasture. Those many dung pads, when left on the ground, has nowhere to disintegrate and go into the soil. So that much area is lost and dried up due to dung. And this is called forage fouling. And cows don't like to feed on grass that is covered with manure. But when you have a good population of dung beetles, a single large dung pad can go down in just a few days. What they do is this: the adult dung beetles, they love drinking the nutrients from the water of the dung, the juice or the liquid part of dung, as they have these sucking mouth parts. So they can't bite. But after they drink the juice from the dung, they use the remaining fiber to create a ball along with a little bit of soil, and they lay an egg inside it. And the larvae that comes out of the egg also feeds on this ball because unlike its parents, it has chewing mouth parts. So it likes to chew on this fiber and come out as a fresh adult dung beetle. So in this process of feeding on the juices and using this fiber along with soil to create brood balls or dung balls, they're destroying and outcompeting many of the harmful insect pests that you will also find breeding in dung pads, like hornflies, faceflies, and helminths like roundworms and gastrointestinal nematodes. So these can transmit diseases and affect the behavior of your livestock and also reduce animal performance and reduce overall animal health. So which is why we use treatments. But the treatments are known to be excreted out in dung and can harm our dung beetles. And then if we harm our dung beetles, we're going to have more of these flies and worms breeding in dung because the dung beetles are not there to suppress them. So it's like a vicious cycle. If you have a good population of dung beetles, then you would likely use fewer chemicals. So there are also other types of dung beetles. We often think of dung beetles only as those that feed on dung, but there are dung beetles that visit dung pads to feed on these parasitic flies and larvae. Those are predatory dung beetles, and we know very little about them, but they're also quite important. And within the dung feeding dung beetles, you have dung beetles that don't just create balls of dung that I'm talking about to lay their egg, but they just live around in the dung pat and they're commonly referred to as dwellers. And some other dung beetles have these really long legs. And to avoid competition, they've evolved to have these long legs to roll this little dung ball and bury it elsewhere. So, in this process of having all these different kinds of dung beetles in your dung pat, and when they maneuver in it, feed on it, breed on it, they bring down nutrients into the soil through these actions. So it increases soil fertility in your pasture and it reduces pests, like I said. And they also reduce methane emissions and bring air into the soil. So they provide free soil aeration for us. And in this process, farmers can save a lot of money. So they're both, like you said, ecologically and economically valuable, especially in the long term for your pasture or farm's overall health.
That is so much interesting information. I didn't know that there were dung beetles that predated on the larva. That's new to me. That's very cool. And yeah, you just listed so many ecological services that they provide. That's amazing. And so they can get away with being non-charismatic. That's okay. They give
Yeah,
they bring a lot to the table, don't they?
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So what drew you to start studying these less flashy, but clearly very important insects to begin with?
Okay, good question. It was really just curiosity. In the beginning, I had no idea after my master's, due to a limited exposure to entomology. I didn't know it was a field that people study. I didn't know that there was this whole science behind insects. I basically didn't know how much insects affect our lives this much because they're so tiny and they're always usually considered as pests. But when I came across this project at a research organization called ATTRA in India, I took up this opportunity because I thought, wow, there are organisms that eat dung. They eat poop. And they're so cute because, like I said, they don't bite. So I started with looking at dung beetle diversity in northeast of India, which is part of 3 world biodiversity hotspots. This means that regions over there have a lot of diversity and richness. They're in the tropics, but at the same time, those ecosystems are threatened due to habitat change and rapid urbanization. So what we were trying to look there were what dung beetle diversity exists. And that drew me to understand from scratch what makes a dung beetle and how it's different from other beetles. So I started with studying taxonomy, and then I was exposed to conservation. And I understood that in conservation, many times the focus is on mammals and birds that are often considered more charismatic. But there's also 6-legged wildlife that needs attention. Insects, basically. Most of them, like dung beetles, are threatened, and some dung beetle species are also endangered around the world. And even within insects, like you said, monarch butterflies can be more charismatic, right? And within dung beetles, sometimes the ones that roll a dung ball, the big ones that we often see in documentaries from Africa, are probably more charismatic than other tiny dung beetles, like the dwellers or the predatory dung beetles I mentioned before. So, what was fascinating is that the story is different depending on where you are. In Australia, it's different. In New Zealand as well, where they had to import exotic dung beetles, and where much of the cattle dung is still managed by introduced dung beetle species. But in the United States, it's different. We have good native dung beetle species as well doing this job for us. And in India, it was different. So, again, depending on where you're hearing this podcast from, if you're from a US state with bisons and other mammals, then you would have a variety of dung and therefore a variety of dung beetle species. You'd have more species there. So, what all ties all of this together is the fact that all of these beetles depend on dung and their entire lives revolved around it. And that's what I think was fascinating for me.
Yeah, it is really interesting to learn how different species from completely different parts of the animal kingdom, like mammals and insects, really rely on each other to fulfill their life cycle.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So, what is the status of dung beetles in West Virginia, where you're doing your research? Is there a lot of species diversity? You mentioned there are native dung beetle species there. And are the populations adequate or are they struggling?
West Virginia, as we know, is a state fully located in the Appalachian region. So there are a lot of pockets of natural vegetation and forested landscapes surrounding pasture. which is a top agricultural commodity here, not just in West Virginia, but throughout the Appalachian region. So these natural landscapes can serve as a buffer region for our dung beetles found in the pasture because they're cooler and they're less open as compared to a pasture. And studies have shown that these natural landscapes surrounding a pasture can be a good refuge for dung beetles. So we expected to find a lot of species diversity in West Virginia pastures. There have been studies around the region, but nothing was focused solely on the state. So, which was the motivation behind our study? It was a collaborative project between WVU Extension, and WV Conservation Agency. And we sampled 36 farms over 2 years to see what kind of species we have. And we found 30 species in West Virginia that are only dung feeding. So there is pretty good diversity. And again, you should remember this is only from pastures. And I haven't counted the dung beetles you would find in other landscapes or the other dung associated beetles in this number. It's just truly dung feeding beetles. There could be other predatory beetles. So the US has a total of 170 species of dung beetles. And in recent studies in pastures from Vermont and New York, had 20 dung associated beetles. In New Jersey, there were 26 dung associated beetles. In Maryland, has reports of 21 only truly dung feeding. So, looking at all of this, if you compare with Maryland, we may have just half, like around 11 only truly dung feeding. But overall, I think we have a good number in our pastures. And what we're looking at right now is where these 30 species are located and what kind of farms, what sort of management those farms have, and what sort of surrounding landscape they have to see whether these factors influence the dung beetle populations here. And interestingly, what we're seeing is that although some species are really abundant on certain farms, they're not abundant on all farms, and majority of the farms had relatively low abundance. So this suggests that there are factors influencing their populations that we still need to better understand. And we're also receiving emails from farmers and producers in West Virginia who are interested in strengthening their dung beetle populations, which is encouraging because it shows that producers are becoming more aware and more interested in reviving dung beetle populations.
Yeah, that is neat that they're reaching out to you to ask for support. So what can farmers do to make their farms more dung beetle friendly?
So depending on the region your farm is located, the climate, the soil, its surrounding vegetation, its connectivity to other pastures and natural vegetation can all affect what kind of dung beetles you would see in your pasture in the first place. And the practices can look different from farm to farm. And research shows even what kind of forage you grow, because that's what's excreted in dung, and how and what you treat your animals with, how you manage their grazing movement, whether you rotate them or not around the pastures, can all have impacts on dung beetles. But the good news is that the producers don't necessarily have to do a lot. At least there should be no worries about feeding the dung beetles. If you have livestock, you're already providing the resource they need, a lot of fresh dung, preferably organic, free of treatments or with less of it. But we know that these treatments are essential for animal health, and different treatments get excreted out and persist in dung paths for different periods. So, if the active chemical in these treatments is known to persist for very long, then it can interfere with the active period of dung beetles, say in late spring or summer, and this will affect the beetles and kill them in the long run. So, very small concentrations of these chemicals in dung can also affect dung beetles. And like I said, these formulations and concentrations can vary in its toxicity and can affect different species differently and different farms in different way, because in some farms maybe the dung beetles are used to it due to like historic livestock treatments, and in some farms they're not. So it's all a combination of factors which is hard to control when we have other things to do in the farm than look at dung beetles. So I looked at recent research. Clarify, which is used to control fly population, would kind of vary in concentration in how much it's released in the dung, because you can't really control how much of the clarify the cow eats because it's a feed additive. So it's just mixed in the food, and it can, vary in how much a cow can excrete it out. Because of that, it's sort of confusing in that sense. And in terms of long range, which the active ingredient is epinomectin, that gets released out in higher concentration. And so it can kill more pests, but also our dung beetles. And it can persist for up to 72 to 90 days in the pat. So these two are sort of not the most recommended. However, Safeguard, which has fenbendazole, is pretty safe, but it requires frequent application. So when excreted out, it's known to be safe to dung beetles, but it could be impacting other beneficial organisms in the soil, which we don't know yet. So this is what I can say about treatments. And apart from treatments, just other practices that support overall biodiversity should also support dung beetles. As in integrated pest management, the focus is usually on bottom up approaches. So we should prevent the spread of pests first. And we can do this by maintaining hedgerows or living fences, which are native shrubs or trees grown around the pasture. This can preserve like natural habitat and create those refuge regions I was talking about in your pasture, provide shade for dung beetles. Shade is important because it can slow down the drying of dung paths and provide fresh dung for dung beetles for a longer time. And how animals are grazed at like what intensity and in which style matters. Research shows that low to moderate grazing intensity is better, but completely abandoning grazing will also not ensure good dung supply. And overdoing it with high intensity can compact the soil and also affect your vegetation and harden the soil for beetles that need to tunnel. And we know that rotational grazing has benefits overall for managing weeds, improving your soil health and pasture vegetation. It is management intensive, but it's also known to have good like benefit dung beetle populations around. And the effects of continuous versus rotational grazing on dung beetles can differ because both have sort of different effects on dung beetles. So continuous grazing would provide a lot of dung in one area, right? So there can be like different aged dung paths. So some dung paths would be fresh, some would be dry. So this can bring in dung beetles that differ in like their successional stages. So some dung beetles prefer really fresh dung. Those are the tunnelers. And some can come in like the dwellers I mentioned when it gets a little bit dry. So you'll see a lot more diversity in probably continuously grazed pasture plots, but in rotational grazing, you can have a continuous supply of like fresh dung and less compaction, and you will see a different successional stage of dung beetle, the tunneler dung beetles, basically the early successional dung beetles that want fresh dung. So these effects can all vary. So it's a little complicated what farmers can do to like improve dung beetle populations. So we need to look at other things apart from all of these practices that can speed up their dung beetle populations.
Right. So sounds like what's good for like a diverse, healthy pasture system is good for dung beetles as well as good for the farmer.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's good for the soil is good for the dung beetles. Sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. And it is so complex. There's not one, recipe you can give to say, do X, Y, Z, and suddenly you'll have the perfect farm.
Exactly.
So say you have a producer who's providing all of those things. They've got hedgerows and shade and some diversity of plants and everything. But they want more dung beetles, but they want to speed things along. They can purchase dung beetles, like some people buy ladybugs and praying mantises, correct?
Yeah, there have been instances where farmers have stopped treating livestock and have gone fully organic but are still not seeing dung beetles. And the reason is it can take a long time for dung beetles to come back because years of historical treatment can affect dung beetles, and it's hard for them to just come back once you stop treating your livestock. So there are farms that are completely organic, but they're still not seeing many dung beetles. So what they can do to speed things up is where my project on rearing dung beetles come in. But first, I would probably recommend understanding what species you already have. And I know that's easier said than done, but at least trapping is easy enough. I know a lot of producers who are very interested in what dung beetles they have, and trapping is pretty easy. You just need to use a dung baited pitfall trap, which you can look up online and look at what species you have or how many beetles you have. But it's obviously not easy to understand whether something is actually a dung beetle. But I'm still sure that most people know what a dung beetle looks like. But now, like I said, there are also these tiny dung beetles and predatory dung beetles that maybe some of us are not very aware of. So there are these social media groups where a lot of producers post photos and help getting these beetles identified. And you can again also collaborate with researchers like me who are interested in dung beetle research by sending them an email and asking if what you're seeing are dung beetles. And then you would know how many species should be in your pasture if you look at like your region and see what research shows, like what sort of dung beetle should be in that region, and if they're in your pasture. So, and in terms of purchasing dung beetles, there are two sellers in the United States, maybe two or three, but they're quite handful, and they mostly sell a mix of introduced species with some native species. And these introduced species of dung beetles are not harmful or invasive, at least not yet. But in our case, we need good. So, because in our case, we need good dung beetles, whether they're introduced or not, that can tackle dung. So it shouldn't matter for now whether they're introduced or not. But we still don't have enough data whether these introduced species in the long run can replace our native dung beetle species in the long run. And at the same time, introduced species could also be struggling to establish in different regions, or you may not be even seeing them in your farm, um, along with not seeing native species. So these, and the other challenges are that these sellers can have limited stock when because the demand is obviously high, and they're also priced pretty high to $1 a beetle to around $9 or $10 for the larger sized native dung beetle. And that's for one beetle. And we know that we need a good number of beetles to process and work on all of that dung. So then farmers could try purchasing these dung beetles, but they can also focus on improving the landscape that I spoke of and the management factors that I said. And another thing is they can also try out rearing native or local species that they're finding in large numbers in their farm if they are. So those are some ways that they can purchase or work on species that they might be actually already having in good numbers in the farm.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I've never heard of rearing dung beetles on your own farm. I'd love to hear what a dung beetle nursery looks like. What would that, what would that entail?
Yeah, it can actually be very simple, surprisingly. A dung beetle nursery can be built using materials that farmers already have. People have used recycled containers in the past, like washed up IBC containers. They've used feeding bins and deep pots with a media. So, the next thing apart from a container is what's important is the media, which is just usually a mix of organic soil and sand, and the other thing is water, because moisture is very important. And the last thing is you need to supply it with fresh dung and ensure you supply that at least once every week, and that it's free from treatments. So these are just the things that you would need to create a dung beetle nursery. And moisture is important because you need to ensure there's enough moisture so that the media, the soil can hold shape, because dung beetles use that to create the brood balls. So it needs to be a little bit moist to hold the shape. And if you don't want to use any media or any container, you can also do it outside on your farm using wooden frames. And these frames are in a square shape, and they're directly placed or fitted onto your farm's ground. So it just makes use of your farm's environment. And this is done after de-weeding and all that. And again, you need to release your beetles and feed it once every week. These are the two methods that are usually used. And like I said, the key ingredients are pretty simple and should be available in your farm already. And a lot of the further details I'm still analyzing as part of my project, including production numbers and like species specific results, like what species does well in which nursery method, and how many progeny can a beetle have when we release it, like one beetle when we release, how many progeny it can come up with, and what's the time and money that goes into doing all of this. That is very important. So hopefully that's something we can discuss in a future follow-up podcast maybe.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such a great option for people, especially since like what you described, it's very low tech. The materials are basically right there, available, easily available, and
Yeah.
yeah, you could get going pretty easily. So, do you see it as something a farmer could do just to repopulate their own farms, or could this be an economic opportunity for them? I mean, you mentioned $1 to $9 a beetle.
Yeah.
Those numbers might be pretty enticing. Could this be a business opportunity?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Farmers could use nurseries to strengthen dung beetle populations on their own farms, but there may also be opportunities to produce beetles for other farms. And like I said, the investment should be low in the beginning. Finding a good starter population to start your dung beetle nursery can be a challenge, but if they can monitor and find out from other dung beetle enthusiasts about their region or farm, I think it should be fine. And beyond selling beetles themselves, I think there's opportunities related to the nursery materials as well, because not everyone would be interested in carpentry or creating these. You need carpentry to create those frames. And you can come up with different innovative ways, I guess, to breed these beetles. So the frames on the soil involves carpentry, and there are opportunities then for nursery construction, consulting, or other services. And in fact, like I mentioned, there is this active Facebook group called Dung Beetle Exchange with over 3,000 members. And they're discussing everything dung beetles, what dung beetles they're seeing in their farms around United States. So that would also be a good place to join if you're interested in networking, like I spoke about, or potentially buying. I've seen people asking for dung beetles from different regions. And also, you can join that group if you're interested in selling dung beetles. And so, yeah, these are all the opportunities that exist.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't even think about offering it as a service of like helping other people start their own nurseries too. That's a really great point.
Yeah, in my experiment, we you need replicates of things to have more data and do the statistics and validate these numbers. So I had to create 36 nurseries, and I am not very well equipped with carpentry. So I realized then that, oh, this is something someone who's interested in building frames can help others with.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure after 30 or so, you were ready for to hire someone else to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that dung beetle Facebook group, and as a dung beetle researcher, you probably have your ear to the ground, pun intended, to learn about other research that's going on around the country about dung beetles. So, have you seen anything out there that's exciting to you in the world of dung beetle research or things like that?
Yeah, there's really a lot of valuable and timely work happening in the United States. For example, in researchers in Florida, led by Rosie Stanbrook, they're working on economic analysis that help quantify the value of dung beetles to farmers. So they're coming up with an app now after their study, which I think producers can use on ground to see how much their farm's dung beetles can save based on the details of their farm, like what area, how much area it has, how many animals, and what kind of dung beetles they're seeing. So I guess that's a very practical tool for farmers. And research from 2006 showed that dung beetles can save the US economy $380 million a year, which would have obviously increased now in 2026. So I think having this app can really be useful in that sense. And at University of California, Riverside, my supervisor, Dr. Elizabeth Rowan, and team, they're studying population models for predatory dung beetles, which is exciting because we know very little about them. And I know that they're trying to also better understand dung beetle communities there on the West Coast to better pasture and animal health. Apart from that, there's also other great work going on, and if I try to list them, I might miss some. But one thing I'm excited about is the Entomological Society of America, who's hosting their second dung beetle symposium ever in November at Ohio. It's a great place that where you could come and listen to research talks if you're interested. I think it's the only it's the second dung beetle symposium ever, like I said, and it's showing that the field is growing and the researchers are beginning to collaborate more closely. Their abstracts and contacts, therefore, should be available on ESA or ESA's official website soon. So that's a good place to see if you can contact someone working in your state with dung beetles. Um, you can also look for search using the dung beetle like keyword on their ESA website and see who's working on that. That could be a good place. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it seems like it's about time to have this research take off, given the economic value that dung beetles provide to farmers around the country. Very cool. I got to check out that app. So I know you said you're still analyzing the data that you've spent the past few years collecting. So do you have any preliminary results you can share? I know you can't get into the weeds too much since you're still working on it, but I'd be curious if there's some observations you can share already.
Yeah, sure. One thing I've learned is that obtaining a good starter population can be a big challenge. So you want to start rearing a species that's available in good numbers in your region. Once you have healthy populations established, many species seem capable of doing well if you provide them the right conditions, good good dung to feed on, and moisture and like a warm environment indoors, temperature controlled. We're seeing encouraging signs that native and locally adapted species are performing particularly well, which is exciting from a conservation perspective. And with my other results, I will keep you updated soon.
Great. And we can link to your project where I know you said you'll be updating that with your results as you get to them. I know science is always an ongoing thing. You don't finish one research project and say, okay, we know everything we need to know. So I was wondering if there are questions that you still want to explore in your research or that you think other researchers could look at.
Yeah, there are many questions that researchers can look at, some of which I already mentioned about the overlooked predatory dung beetles and their role, and how the introduced species are doing. Also, how producers can also look at better understanding their beetles on their farm. For now, we know what species we have, at least in the case of West Virginia and some other states' pastures which are studied. So, if different pastures in different regions can monitor their dung beetle populations, that would be great. And more importantly, like I said, we need collaboration between entomologists or dung beetle enthusiasts and producers and who know the land best. So, and there's also enough scope to better understand practical recommendations for producers. What actions have the biggest impact? What species are best suited for different regions? And we can also always improve these rearing methods. And I also think there's potential for stronger producer networks where people can exchange knowledge and share beetles and support each other.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, those are many great ideas. So, any final parting thoughts or things we didn't get a chance to talk about? I feel like you've given us so much great information about dung beetles and how farmers can support them and rear them. You've given us a lot to think about, and I've learned a lot. I wanted to know if you had any last thoughts that we didn't get a chance to cover.
Thank you, Nina, for asking me these questions. It really helped me as well to summarize everything and in a way that's going to be useful for all of us at the farm. And it was a great learning experience for me as well. Final thoughts, I would like to thank the producers and farmers I worked with, because this project wouldn't have been possible without their support. They gave me access to their farms and they shared their observations. And in many cases, they helped me locate untreated manure or organic manure, which is really important for my rearing studies, without which I wouldn't be able to do those experiments. So I really admire their spirit of wanting to do better for their farms and the community, and their passion for sharing and learning. So I'd like to thank all the farmers and producers, extension agents that I worked with through this project that Northeast SARE funded. So I'd like to thank them as well.
Yeah, that's a great reminder that this kind of research doesn't happen in a vacuum. You worked with a whole network of people, and it takes that kind of collaboration to really come up with useful results that farmers can implement in the field. So thank you for highlighting that. So where can people find your work if they want to sit down and read about it and learn more about the details of your research?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to NCAT as well for providing this opportunity to share this work through this podcast. People can find my work about the dung beetle nursery at my proposal, which is on the SARE website, and the link should be provided. And this link will constantly be updated until 2027 with my project's results, which are catered to West Virginia and the species that I found here in this region, but obviously it will have implications for everywhere. And my lab website is also linked, so you can check that out for future publications. And my email is sh00087@mix.wvu.edu, which is also provided. And if you have any questions about West Virginia or any region nearby, or anything regarding dung beetles, I can always help via an email. And if you have any questions or suggestions, I can take that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been really fun to talk to you. And I think we can say that beetles are actually pretty charismatic in the end, if you think about it.
Oh yeah, I always believed in that. That's what got me started into entomology and this field. So yeah, but that's the general perception, I guess, of people outside. But yeah, I think within entomology and those who know dung beetles, I guess it's different. We already think they're charismatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, now I think we'll convince even more people. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.